Welcome everyone, I'm Alessandra Montanelli, a senior consultant from Sinloc, Italy, and today I lead the session on how to choose the right funding for energy transition projects developed under the EnerCmed project and co-funded by the Interreg Euro-MED Programme. EnerCmed aims to promote the energy transition in port hinterlands by supporting the creation of renewable energy communities integrated with nature-based solutions. The main objective is to deliver innovative solutions that address energy poverty and improve climate resilience in vulnerable residential areas of Mediterranean port cities. The project is being implemented across Genova, Valencia, Novigrad, Pula, and Patras, working closely with the local authorities and communities. In this context, training, capacity building, and technical assistance are crucial to empower stakeholders and ensure sustainable results. This unit aims to provide energy transition promoters with a clear path for the evaluation of the most suitable funding option for the long-term sustainability of the project. Too often, clean energy transition plans are well developed, but then they are not implemented because of the lack of the right financial scheme. That's why energy planning should be somehow parallel to the financial planning. A sound planning, indeed, accounts for financial aspects since the beginning, to ensure consistency between the proposed interventions and available resources. Being aware of the different opportunities in terms of funding is the first step to guarantee a successful implementation of the energy transition plans. To have an overview of the typical schemes for energy transition projects, we recommend watching the dedicated unit on funding opportunities on our knowledge sharing platform. Once all the opportunities are displayed, then the point is to evaluate each instrument against the project. First, we shall dedicate some time to the analysis of the funding lines. Once we have all the characteristics of the project on one side and those of the fundings on the other, the real matching comes into play. This process will lead to the selection of the best instrument or financial scheme. That said, the process to activate the finance starts. When dealing with funding and financial schemes, usually the term funding refers to public resources, namely the grants, while financial schemes evoke private money, for example, bank loans. Moreover, it is important to define the technical assistance. This term refers to all the activities that precede and are preparatory to the investment, such as feasibility studies, the preparation of tender documents by public entities, and therefore occur before the expenditure of the so-called CAPEX. There are also funding sources and tools, generally very specific, that can cover these expenses. Public resources derive from European, national, or regional sources, and are often grants provided through specific funding pools with set durations. To access this, it's important to prepare technical documentation, sometimes of feasibility studies, others a full project, and follow the requirements and procedures outlined in the call text. Consequently, due to the evaluation process, the activation time for financing is typically medium to long term. In the case of private resources, one can consider bank loans or financing through third-party funds. An example is the energy performance contract, which has become a consolidated practice for the energy efficiency of public buildings, where the investment is borne by the private operator who carries out the works and then repaid through a fee by the public entity. Here we can also include crowdfunding, which is a quite innovative scheme, but has already interesting examples and platforms are gaining popularity in the sector. Finally, there are hybrid schemes, such as public-private partnerships, which, depending on the specific project, can represent an interesting tool for investment implementation. So far, we have discussed about the characteristics of the funding opportunities. On the other hand, it's important to have a clear understanding of the characteristics of each project included in the transition plan. The analysis typically focuses on 6 key features that affect the identification of the most suitable funding option. First is the project maturity. This represents a parameter that deeply influences the choice of the funding scheme. The first distinction is between projects that are at an idea or a pre-feasibility stage to projects for which a more in-depth analysis have been carried out and feasibility studies or design are already available. Sometimes this decision may not be easy, as much depends on the type of the project being examined. In general, there are 3 different levels of maturity. The idea stage, where no detailed analyses are available, and the project still needs to be defined from a technical and economic point of view, relying only on parametric sizing and estimates. The feasibility stage, where more detailed analyses have been developed in order to quantify the investments and define the technical characteristics. The first design levels are also available. The implementation stage. Once the final design has been carried out, the characterization of the project from a technical and economic and financial point of view is made available, together with a risk analysis. Here, the subsequent step is the construction. Another feature of the projects to be considered in the financial planning is its size. This corresponds to the expected investment. In fact, each financial instrument or call has its own requirements. Whether public or private resources are involved, there are often limits to the size of the project. For example, the European Investment Bank finances projects capable of activating at least €30 million of investment through the ELENA facility, while calls promoted by the regions under the European Development Fund tend to have a smaller size, up to a maximum of €500,000, varying according to the specific financing measure. Different funding schemes apply to different beneficiaries, which in most cases correspond to the project promoter. The main difference concerns the public and private nature of the beneficiary. In fact, public entities may face specific regulatory constraints for activated investments and/or apply to a certain type of funding, where private subjects may be excluded from public funding for their profit purpose nature and often present a higher investment risk. Another important feature is the timeline. The timing of the project must be aligned with that of the funding source in terms of both development and duration. For example, some public calls, which typically have a limited time window for submission, may require specific documentation at the application stage. It's therefore necessary for the promoter to make an early effort to get to the submission stage with all the necessary documents. Similarly, the timing of application, evaluation, and disbursement of funds should be known in order to be able to properly assess the opportunity in relation to the project objectives. The aforementioned ELENA facility typically requires from 9 to 12 months to complete the application process and start the project. Therefore, when evaluating the most appropriate funding opportunity, the project promoter must allow adequate time for the project to be developed to the required level and for the resources to be obtained. Another example concerns the duration of the projects. Again, the ELENA facility always finances projects lasting 3 to 4 years. In other cases, however, the work is expected to be completed in less time. The possibility for the project to generate positive cash flows, especially from the early stages of its realization, is the discriminating factor between the 2 broad categories of resources, namely the grants and the debt. Although applicable in almost all projects, a grant is extended necessary when the project is unable to achieve sustainability, and its realization can only depend on resources that do not have to be repaid over time. This is typically the case for infrastructures or public works, which perform a service for the communities, such as schools or hospitals. Again, the possibility for the project to generate cash flows also makes it possible to attract private capitals, as in the case of public-private partnerships or EPC contracts or banking, where in addition to the return on capital, interests are also added. The technology represents another key parameter that orients the choice of a funding scheme. In fact, clean energy transition projects often require the use of advanced technologies to foster decarbonization and achieve local adaptation and mitigation strategies. Although the cost for implementing new technologies is generally high in terms of CapEx, different technologies present different characteristics, for example, in terms of risk, of construction, durability, maintenance needs, that correspond to different types of funding. In fact, funds that typically finance electrical renewables do not also cover fuel cells and hydrogen, or the funding scheme that we can observe in the energy efficiency sector is not replicable in sustainable mobility. We've just reviewed the main characteristics of projects to be considered during the financial structuring phase, as well as when comparing different financial schemes. On this slide, you can see an illustrative diagram of the funding sources that are generally available depending on the type of project. The table is not intended to be exhaustive, but it can serve as a useful and practical reference for an initial assessment. As we can see from the table here, crowdfunding is typically only available for small-scale projects in basically all the sectors of projects involved in energy transition. Public-private partnerships may be suitable for energy efficiency-related projects. The same is true for project financing and for the forfeiting model. Again, the EPC is only relevant when dealing with energy efficiency. Tax incentives, on the other hand, is very regional specific. Project bonds are, on the contrary, on the crowdfunding, are available for large-scale projects and typically are observed in sectors such as transport infrastructures, as if funds are subject to specific eligibility criteria and they occur when in case of market failure. Thank you for following this training session. We invite you to explore more content on the EnerCmed knowledge sharing platform through the QR code displayed in this slide. There you will find a wide range of resources on the technical, economic, and environmental aspects of developing renewable energy communities in Mediterranean areas.